Hi, everybody. It's meteorologist Joe Chaffee. On this Saturday, we did a short range, a video on the short range earlier, and now I'm just going to focus on the long range today. You know, I read around on different weather boards, and I know that there are a lot of snow lovers out there. And I also know that they tend to get very frustrated because for some reason they seem to think that it's supposed to snow every single day from the beginning of November to the end of April. And it just doesn't really work that way. Um, the month that we've had so far in November in the East is pretty typical of Novembers. And also, it did come with a not so typical lake effect snow event that brought some early record snows to much of interior New York State and in the snow belt areas. This is something that's unusual, certainly something that didn't happen last winter by any stretch of the imagination. So it's very unrealistic to think that what you're seeing now is what you're going to see a month from now or 2 months from now. I don't know what it's going to look like 2 months from now. The point is that the pattern development and pattern change process is a very complex thing. It seldom happens on a particular or hinges on a particular event. It's a long process. The pattern has changed. Okay, there is no question that the pattern that we had back going into the middle part of November has changed. The problem is that it may not have changed it to something you particularly like, and that's just the way it is. Now, one thing that I was actually concerned about, and it seems like this is the part that wound up being the easier part of the fix, is that it looks as if we are going into a more active pattern from the standpoint of having weather events and precipitation events happening, as opposed to going weeks and weeks without any rain. And I think that that is going to be at least the one carryover going forward. Now, eventually it'll turn cold. I can't tell you the exact time and place. And I also still believe that we are going to see some sort of threat for a snow event, probably sooner rather than later. And I would also advise that when you look at weather models on a daily basis, you're going to come to see that many of the snowstorms that these models put on the map don't happen. Okay. If we're going to get one, it's going to be something that the models are not picking up at this point in the long range. It's a matter of whether the flavor of the upper air is going to be favorable. I think it is to some degree. It's not perfect, but I'm still thinking that we are going to see something in the first couple of weeks of December. But let's take you through what's happening here on the GFS now that I finished that lecture. And you can see what's happening for the middle part of this coming week. We have a strong upper air storm that moves into the Great Lakes, and we have a number of disturbances or troughs that are rotating around it. We've got one lifting up for Tuesday, a stronger one that's going to be swinging around, and all of this happening while this moves on to the east in sort of a wobbly fashion. The ridge, now this is the primary difference. You have ridges on both coasts, by the way, and you kind of have this upper-low sandwiched in the middle. You don't have a clear-cut flow out of Canada. Most of the Canada is still relatively cut off. So what cold air you have is basically cyclonically produced. In other words, the strength of the upper air storm winds up producing cold air. Now, as we move forward on the GFS anyway, kind of wobbles that upper low eastward. We turn a little colder next weekend into next week. And, instead it has more troughs swinging around so that it acquires this rather cold look at the end of the period, which I guarantee you is going to change when we get there. Canada at this point is a little more open with the flow. You've got some cold air that's beginning to get involved. You still have a pretty active southern jet stream. So that shows, there's going to be troughs moving along the way. It's not a picture-perfect pattern by any stretch of the imagination for snow lovers, but I wouldn't be surprised if something happens somewhere out of this, but we'll see. The bottom line is that we're still in this sort of evolutionary process. One of the things I picked up on, the Europeans been doing this for a couple of days. It's a little different than the GFS with regards to what happens after this weather system moves out, and that is it really keeps troughing near the East Coast. And this is a colder look on the European than on the GFS. If we show you here by comparison, the European has this deep upper low sitting over Newfoundland. It has another system coming into the Pacific West. It has this thing in the Southwest that's opening up. And, the flow is basically west-northwest out of Canada, so that's a colder than normal flow. It actually, starting from day 8 through day 10, through much of the Northeast, it has daytime temperatures topping out in the 20s and 30s, which would be about 10 degrees below normal. That's pretty cold. We have to also remember where we are in terms of the time of year. You're not going to get a day like you would get normally in January where, say, it doesn't get out of the 20s or doesn't get out of the teens. Okay, this is the end of November, beginning of December. If you get a day where it doesn't get out of the low 40s or upper 30s and low 40s, that's pretty cold. That's 10 degrees below normal, but it still might not necessarily be cold enough to set up a pattern for snow. But again, I think the big takeaway is the fact that we have a much more active pattern going forward. And if you look at the GFS by comparison on day 10 with the European, it's different. Here's the GFS, here's the European again. So you can see there's differences in the models where how the ridge is set up, what happens off near Newfoundland where the GFS takes it out much faster and lifts it to the northeast. It also, unlike the European, the GFS has much more energy that it wants to bring in to the western part of the United States, and you can see it here. So it just kind of rolls along. So, and then a little bit of ridging here in the eastern states. So it's not as cold a look in the middle part of the period as it is on the European. So there's going to be a lot to resolve when we go forward. I think we are still going to transition over eventually to a colder than normal pattern, looking at all the things that I've seen going forward. If we look at the temperature profile, especially up in Canada, this is the first real big change in that for the first time that we've seen since we've been started just doing these things, since looking at it closely through November. We see a gradual increase in the area of below normal temperatures throughout Canada now as colder air starts to come down from the poles and moves on into northwestern Canada. And some of that cold air does spread into the eastern part of the United States. This is late in the period. So we're now, past the first week of December. And again, I grant you that, this is going to change 100 times before we finally figure out how this is really going to play out. So the bottom line is, I think the precipitation part of this pattern change that we've had seems to be a lot more reliable than the cold part. The cold part seems to be a bit more of a struggle. I'll just show you. Let me get a closer view so you can take a look at the total precip expected during the next 16 days. Most of this, by the way, falls in the first part of the period. This is going to fall through next week, where the models have some substantial rains here on the order of several inches, and has another event at some point as we go through. But I'm going to say that whatever the models are showing past day 7 or 8 is probably not going to be where it is. Okay, it's going to be different. So, just a review. Here's our system for Tuesday. Another little shot coming into Wednesday, and then a stronger wave. That now the GFS, by the way, straddles it right up just offshore. So then it goes by. This is where the European and the GFS start to differ, because the European has it colder than the GFS during this period. Not that the GFS doesn't have it cold, but that the European has it colder. And then the GFS also has something coming out of the Gulf around day 9 and 10, and then moving on to the northeast, and then still another system around day 13, and then still another system at day 16. So you can see it is busy. Now, if you look out in the west, this pattern, while it's changed, it has not changed into a wet pattern in the west. You have weather systems that come into the Pacific Northwest, but they don't do very much once they hit the mountains. They kind of redevelop when you go east of the mountains. So there doesn't look to be too much change. I know a few of you that watch these videos from Colorado are concerned with about, with drought situations, you might have a shot for some snow here along about day 9 and day 12 if this is correct, but the models don't seem to be developing anything too substantial. So, it's going to be very interesting going forward to see how this all plays out. So that's a quick look at the long range today. Just kind of holding everybody's hand, and we're walking down this road together as we watch this process evolve. And eventually, it's going to evolve into something for the eastern states that's going to get snow lovers all gelled up. And the good news is that we seem to be getting more frequent weather events, so that's good news as far as trying to break the drought is concerned. So check out the latest web posts on meteorologistjoechaffee.com, weatherlongisland.com, and nycweathernow.com. And also, when you're on my website, you can subscribe to my weather app for local forecasts for New York, New Jersey, Eastern Pennsylvania, Long Island, Hudson Valley, and Southern New England.